The main thing is to protect these characters, make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them, and that the universe of Star Wars continues to grow.
Now, for the last day or so, I've had people messaging me asking if I've seen or heard about this new book written by the late, great J.W. Rinzler, where Marcia Lucas, who is the ex-wife of George Lucas, had some pretty interesting things to say about Disney Star Wars and those who are running it, including Kathleen Kennedy herself. And Marcia Lucas is by no means just the ex-wife of George Lucas. She, along with Paul Hirsch and Richard Chew, were editors on Star Wars, or as we call it now, A New Hope, and famously helped save it in the edit, or saved it from being a rather bloated, poorly paced and put together mess that probably would have long since been forgotten by now. And I'm sure many of you have seen the video out there that covers what I'm talking about. But anyway, enough preamble, let's just get right into it with what Marcia Lucas had to say in this book. I liked Kathleen. I always liked her. She was full of beans. She was really smart and really bright, really wonderful woman. And I liked her husband, Frank. I liked them a lot. Now that she's running Lucasfilm and making movies, it seems to me that Kathy Kennedy and J.J. Abrams don't have a clue about Star Wars. They don't get it. And J.J. Abrams is writing these stories. When I saw that movie where they killed Han Solo, I was furious. I was furious when they killed Han Solo. Absolutely, positively, there was no rhyme or reason to it. I thought, you don't get the Jedi story. You don't get the magic of Star Wars. You're getting rid of Han Solo. And then at the end of this last one, The Last Jedi, they have Luke disintegrate. They killed Han Solo, they killed Luke Skywalker, and they don't have Princess Leia anymore. And they're spitting out movies every year. And they think it's important to appeal to a woman's audience. So now their main character is this female who's supposed to have Jedi powers. But we don't know how she got Jedi powers or who she is. It sucks. The storylines are terrible. Just terrible. Awful. You can quote me, J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy. Talk to me. Okay, so even though there's a lot we could sort of get into here, I could just go on and laugh or chuckle about how the ex-wife of George Lucas, who is also an editor from the original trilogy, destroys or dunks on Disney Star Wars by calling it terrible. And I do think she hits the nail on the head when she basically said the sequels are missing that Star Wars magic. I think that's exactly it and what I've been saying in, well, a lot of videos. And so instead of kind of getting into all that again, I'd like to mainly talk about what she seems to think is the most upsetting or disappointing part when it comes to the sequels, which is the way the original characters were handled or what was done with them in the Disney sequel trilogy, pointing out how they all seem to kind of die needlessly, which I think leads to a very interesting question in itself, which is, did they really need to be killed off at all? Should they have maybe survived the trilogy and got some sort of happily ever after instead? And I'll admit, going into the trilogy back when we knew very little about it, I just kind of expected both Han and Luke to die. Han mainly because we know Harrison Ford really didn't want to return to the role in the first place, and doing multiple more films, even though, yeah, he did come back for the Rise of Skywalker for a brief scene, it just didn't seem likely. And Luke, I kind of thought he would die because, well, I thought they'd want to try to give him some sort of big, epic, and spectacular death scene that would be so powerful and dramatic that we'd be moved to tears by it. Even though when Luke did die in The Last Jedi by forcing too hard, I guess, I didn't shed tears, I just asked if this was really happening right now. And that death scene is made oh so much better when we later learn, thanks to the Rise of Skywalker, that Luke could have gone to Crate in person. He didn't have to sacrifice himself that way. And that's because his old X-Wing was still working just fine, even after sitting in the drink for who knows how many years at that point, and the fact that one of the wings had been removed and was being used as a door on a hut, well, it seems J.J. Abrams may not have read the Last Jedi Visual Dictionary to get that little nugget of info, or hadn't watched The Last Jedi close enough, where it is clearly visible being used as a door. But anyway, before I get too far off topic, I thought for sure Leia had the best odds of surviving the trilogy. I actually thought she was almost certain to survive it, and she may have, if not for the unfortunate passing of Carrie Fisher during the making of the films. That obviously changed plans quite a bit, or so I'd imagine. We were even once told Episode 9 would be her movie, essentially, much like how Han was featured in 7 and Luke was featured in 8, I guess. We also know that George Lucas, in his trilogy, would have had her become the Chancellor of the Republic, which seems like a very fitting and perfect conclusion to her story. The sequels we did get, however, regressed her character by splitting her up from Han and putting her back as the leader of a ragtag group of resistance fighters, much like Rebellion 2.0. Even though the New Republic was very much around and going strong when Episode 7 starts, though maybe it wasn't so strong if the destruction of the capital world, Hosnian Prime, leaves it in utter and complete shambles to the point where the First Order takes over like the next day, as basically told to us in the Last Jedi opening crawl. And what makes this even better is we're never told in the films why there is a resistance in the first place, why the New Republic is doing nothing at all about the First Order, which is quite clearly a pretty big threat, again so much so that it had a large enough force to take over virtually unopposed. And yes, I know, some of this is explained elsewhere in the canon, in books and comics, but that's of no use to someone who just watches the films and wants to know what the heck is going on. But the sad thing is, it wasn't just Leia. All three of the big heroes from the previous trilogy have been regressed for the new story. Instead of trying to continue from where they were when we last saw them, from where the characters had been built up to in the original trilogy, they give us an empty shell of what they once were. Not only is Han Solo apart from Leia and back to smuggling, but it seems like he's not very good at it, like he just scams people all the time. Which, and maybe it's just me, is not the impression I got of Han Solo in the original trilogy, and especially in A New Hope. I always got the sense that he's pretty good at what he does, at smuggling, but there was that one time he dropped Jabba's cargo before being boarded by the Imperials, and he's been trying to get himself out from under that ever since, and back to business as usual. But maybe the really sad part about the split between Han and Leia is the likely reason why it happened, which was to force the characters Han, Rey, Finn, and Chewie to the planet Takodana to meet Maz Kanata, who played no real role in the rest of the trilogy, and her good story for another time about Luke Saber was never told, and also so they could have their large action set piece at Maz's castle. Because, you see, the problem for the story is if Han and Leia are still together, Han has no reason whatsoever to avoid Leia, to not immediately contact her and tell her he has BB-8 and the map to Luke. And so instead of going to Takodana, he either just goes straight to Leia, and if we want to argue that he can't, that the Falcon was being tracked or something, let me remind you he goes back to the Resistance base anyway after going to Takodana and after the attack. So what, the tracker no longer works now? And if that's the case, why didn't he just remove it before? But anyway, I can almost see J.J. Abrams sitting there writing the script for Episode 7, trying to figure out why Han wouldn't immediately just contact or go to Leia the instant he realizes he has a map to Luke, a map to his best friend who has gone missing, in large part thanks to his son, when the brilliant idea came to J.J. Abrams to split the characters up to undo their amazing love story from the original trilogy.
The main thing is to protect these characters, make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them, and that the universe of Star Wars continues to grow.
Then there's, of course, Luke Skywalker, who has exiled himself, forgetting all about his family and friends, which used to be his greatest weakness, according to the Emperor at least, or how much he cared about them was his greatest weakness. In fact, he cared so much about his family and friends that, like his father before him, it was almost the reason he turned to the dark side. And one would maybe think Luke had learned his lesson about giving into fear and anger in that one moment where he almost struck down Vader after Vader had threatened to turn his sister to the dark side. But nope, apparently he didn't. Apparently Luke learned nothing from that experience with his father, and so one night he went into his nephew's hut to peer into his nephew's mind, and he did this because he suspected he might find darkness there, that his nephew's mind, Ben Solo, was, I don't know, filled with evil thoughts or something. And so when he found what he suspected he might find, he overreacted and almost killed him. Even though, thanks to the rise of Skywalker and its brilliant writing, we learned what he saw, what Luke saw, what every voice in Kylo Ren's head essentially was Palpatine the whole time. And Luke had, of course, encountered Palpatine before. He'd literally encountered him face to face. So I have a hard time believing that the new version of Palpatine was more evil than that original version Luke had encountered. And I guess Rian Johnson didn't bother to really pay too much attention to The Force Awakens when he was writing The Last Jedi, because there we learn just how conflicted Kylo Ren is, that he is being pulled on by the light side of the Force, which to me sounds an awful lot like what Vader was going through towards the end of Return of the Jedi, that it was a similar conflict to what Luke had sensed. And so one would almost think that if Luke looked into Ben's mind, what he would have seen was some type of conflict there, especially before Kylo Ren or Ben Solo had fully fallen to the dark side. Not that it seems like Ben ever really did fully fall to the dark side. It seems like, again, he was being pulled on by the light. Either way, you'd think Luke would have seen or sensed something similar to the same conflict he saw in his father, and that Luke would have immediately wanted to help Ben, not kill him. But anyway, I know I've gone into all this before, so I'll cut myself off here and end this video by saying that I agree with Marcia Lucas when she said the storylines are terrible, that they're awful. They didn't understand the magic of Star Wars when they wrote and created the sequel trilogy. They didn't try to respect and honor the characters of old, despite what Kathleen Kennedy said they would do. They used the old characters to try to prop up the new characters, but the new ones were so weak and hollow that, unfortunately, they just ended up falling over too. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me, do you agree with Marcia Lucas? Do you agree with myself? Or do you have a different take on all of this? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.